The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as 10-year-old Prince George carefully adjusted his school tie. He had inherited many things from his parents, but perhaps the most remarkable was a quality that seemed to shine brighter with each passing day. The young prince possessed an extraordinary ability to connect with people, a gift that mirrored his mother's natural warmth and genuine interest in others. Princess Catherine had always been known for her remarkable ability to make anyone feel special during their brief encounters. Whether she was speaking with world leaders or chatting with children at a local school, she had a unique way of giving her complete attention to the person in front of her. This quality, which royal watchers had noticed from her very first public appearances, was now blossoming beautifully in her eldest son. The first signs of this special quality appeared when George was just 5 years old. During a family visit to a children's hospital, while his parents were busy with official duties, young George noticed a little girl sitting alone in a wheelchair. Without any prompting from adults, he walked over and sat beside her. The hospital staff watched in amazement as the young prince spent nearly 20 minutes asking the girl about her drawings, listening intently to her stories about her favorite animals, and even attempting to draw a picture of her pet cat. The girl's mother later shared that her daughter had been feeling sad and scared about her upcoming surgery. But, after talking with Prince George, she was excited and hopeful, telling everyone about the kind prince who wanted to see her drawings. The moment was captured by a photographer, but what made it truly special wasn't the official photo. It was the genuine smile on George's face as he concentrated on the little girl's words, completely absorbed in their conversation. As George grew older, this natural empathy continued to develop. During the family's annual summer holiday in Scotland, the young prince would often be found chatting with the staff at Balmoral Castle. The gardeners particularly enjoyed his visits, as George would ask detailed questions about the flowers and vegetables they were growing. He remembered their names, inquired about their families, and even brought them drawings of the castle grounds he had made during his free time. Mrs. Margaret Wilson, the head housekeeper at Balmoral, had worked for the royal family for over 30 years. She often remarked that Prince George reminded her so much of his mother in the way he treated everyone with the same level of respect and interest, regardless of their position. "The young prince has his mother's heart," she would say with a warm smile. "He sees people, really sees them, just like Princess Catherine does." One particularly memorable incident occurred during a state dinner when George was 8 years old. While the adults were engaged in formal conversations, George noticed that one of the younger staff members looked upset. The young man, named David, was working his first major royal event and was clearly nervous about making a mistake. During a quiet moment, George approached him and struck up a conversation. "You look worried," George said with the directness that only children possess. "Are you okay?" David was surprised that the young prince had noticed his anxiety. As they talked, George learned that David was nervous because he wanted everything to be perfect for his first big event. The prince listened carefully and, then, shared his own experiences about feeling nervous before school presentations. He told David that his mother had taught him that everyone feels nervous sometimes, and that it was okay to feel that way. "My mom says that when you care about doing something well, feeling nervous just means you want to do your best," George explained with the wisdom of someone much older than his years. By the end of their conversation, David felt much more confident. The fact that a member of the royal family had taken the time to notice his feelings and offer comfort meant more to him than any formal training could have provided. Word of George's kindness spread through the staff, and it became one of many stories about the young prince's caring nature. George's teachers at school also began to notice his exceptional ability to connect with his classmates. During group projects, he naturally became someone his peers felt comfortable approaching with problems or concerns. His teacher, Mrs. Amanda Foster, observed that George had an unusual ability for a child his age to really listen when others were speaking. "Most children at this age are eager to share their own thoughts and experiences," Mrs. Foster explained to Princess Catherine during a parent-teacher conference. "But George has this remarkable quality of being genuinely interested in what others have to say. He asks follow-up questions and remembers details about his classmates' lives that even some adults might forget." This quality became even more apparent during a school charity event where students were raising money for a local animal shelter. While other children focused on the fun activities and games, George spent much of his time talking with the elderly volunteers who had come to help. He learned about their own pets, asked about the animals at the shelter, and even took notes so he could remember to ask his parents if they could make a donation. One volunteer, an elderly lady named Mrs. Rose Pemberton, was particularly touched by George's attention. She had been feeling quite lonely since her husband passed away the previous year, and she had volunteered at the event hoping to keep herself busy. George's genuine interest in her stories about her late husband's love for animals brought tears to her eyes. He didn't just listen politely like many children do, Mrs. Pemberton later shared. He really heard what I was saying. He asked about my husband's favorite animals, and when I mentioned that we used to have a garden that attracted hedgehogs, his eyes lit up with real interest. He wanted to know everything about the hedgehogs and even asked if I had pictures. The conversation led to Mrs. Pemberton sharing photos on her phone, and George's enthusiasm about the hedgehogs was so genuine that it reminded her of the joy her husband used to take in wildlife. By the end of their chat, she felt uplifted in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Princess Catherine, who had been observing from a distance, felt her heart swell with pride. She recognized in her son the same instinct she had developed over years of royal duties, the understanding that sometimes the most important part of any event isn't the formal speeches or planned activities, but the human connections made along the way. Later that evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Prince William asked George about his favorite part of the charity event. Instead of mentioning the games or the cake, George talked enthusiastically about Mrs. Pemberton and her hedgehogs. He wanted to know if they could create a hedgehog-friendly corner in their own garden, and he asked if they could invite Mrs. Pemberton to visit and help them plan it. She seemed a bit sad when she talked about missing her husband, George explained with the emotional intelligence that continued to amaze his parents. But, when she talked about the hedgehogs, she looked really happy. I thought if she could help us with our garden, she might feel happy more often. Princess Catherine exchanged a meaningful glance with Prince William. Their son's ability to not only notice someone else's emotions but also think of ways to help them feel better was remarkable for a child of any age. It reminded Catherine of her own journey in learning to use her position to make meaningful connections with people from all walks of life. The Hedgehog Garden project became a reality the following spring. Mrs. Pemberton was invited to Kensington Palace to help design a special corner of the garden that would attract and shelter hedgehogs. The day she arrived, George greeted her with a detailed drawing he had made of his vision for the hedgehog sanctuary, complete with notes about the types of plants and shelter structures they might include. As they worked together in the garden, Mrs. Pemberton marveled at the young prince's attention to detail and his genuine concern for the hedgehog's well-being. He asked thoughtful questions about what hedgehogs needed to feel safe and comfortable, and he listened carefully to her explanations about wildlife conservation. "Your Highness," Mrs. Pemberton said as they planted hedgehog-friendly flowers, "your son has such a special way of making people feel important. In all my years, I've rarely met a child who listens with such genuine interest." Princess Catherine smiled as she watched George and Mrs. Pemberton working together. "He gets that quality from many places," she replied thoughtfully, "but I hope that some of it comes from seeing the importance of really connecting with people, no matter who they are or where they come from." The Hedgehog Garden became more than just a wildlife sanctuary. It became a symbol of George's growing understanding that kindness and genuine interest in others could create lasting positive changes in people's lives. Mrs. Pemberton became a regular visitor to the palace, helping to maintain the Hedgehog Garden and forming a special friendship with the royal family. As autumn arrived and George prepared for a new school year, the lessons he was learning about connecting with others continued to shape his character. His ability to see beyond surface appearances and truly care about the people he met was becoming one of his most defining characteristics. The young prince was developing into someone who understood that being royal wasn't just about titles and ceremonies. It was about using whatever advantages and opportunities you had to make other people feel valued and heard. This understanding, inherited from his mother's example and nurtured by countless small interactions, was preparing George for a lifetime of meaningful service to others. The crisp December air filled the London streets as Prince George stepped out of the royal car with his family for their annual Christmas carol service at Westminster Abbey. At 11 years old, he had grown taller and more confident, but the quality that made him special had only grown stronger with time. His ability to form genuine connections with people continued to surprise and delight everyone who met him. Inside the historic Abbey, hundreds of people had gathered for the special service organized by Princess Catherine. The event brought together people from all walks of life, families who had faced challenges during the year, community heroes, charity workers, and members of the public who had shown exceptional kindness to others. As George walked through the abbey with his parents, he wasn't just going through the motions of a royal duty. His eyes were actively seeking out people to connect with, just as his mother had taught him through her own example. Near the front of the abbey, George noticed a young boy about his own age sitting with what appeared to be his grandmother. The boy looked nervous and kept fidgeting with his program. Without hesitation, George approached them during a quiet moment before the service began. "I'm George," he said simply, extending his hand to the boy. "What's your name?" The boy, surprised but pleased by the friendly gesture, introduced himself as Tommy. He explained that this was his first time in such a grand building, and he was worried about doing something wrong during the service. His grandmother, Mrs. Sarah Collins, watched in amazement as Prince George sat down beside Tommy and began sharing his own experiences about feeling nervous in important places. "The first time I came here, I was so worried about tripping on these long carpets," George confided with a grin. "But, you know what my mom told me? She said that everyone here just wants to celebrate together, and nobody's watching to see if you make mistakes. They're all thinking about the same things you are." Tommy's shoulders relaxed as George continued to chat with him about the beautiful decorations, the impressive organ, and how the singing would sound even more amazing because of the way sound travels in the old stone building. By the time the service was ready to begin, Tommy was excited rather than nervous, and he had gained a new friend who promised to wave at him during the hymns. Mrs. Collins later wrote to Princess Catherine, expressing her gratitude for her son's kindness. She explained that Tommy had been having a difficult year at school, struggling to make friends after their family moved to a new area. The confidence he gained from his interaction with Prince George helped him approach other children with more self-assurance when they returned to school in the new year. This incident was just one of many that highlighted how George's natural empathy had become a powerful tool for positive change. His teachers at school had begun to notice that classmates often sought him out when they were facing problems, not because of his royal status, but because of his genuine ability to listen and offer comfort. During a particularly challenging week at school, when one of George's classmates was dealing with his parents' divorce, George showed remarkable maturity in how he handled the situation. Rather than offering simple platitudes or trying to fix the problem, he simply made sure his friend knew he was there to listen. "I don't really know what to say about your parents," George told his friend Alex during lunch break, "but I know it must feel really confusing and sad. Do you want to talk about it, or would you rather just hang out and do something fun?" Alex chose to talk, and George listened for the entire lunch period as his friend shared his worries and fears. When Alex finished speaking, George didn't try to minimize his feelings or offer unrealistic optimism. Instead, he validated his friend's emotions and shared that it was okay to feel upset about such a big change. "My mom always says that feeling sad about hard things doesn't mean you're weak," George offered thoughtfully. "It means you care about your family. And just because things are changing doesn't mean the love goes away." The friendship that developed between George and Alex became a source of strength for Alex throughout his parents' divorce proceedings. George's consistent presence and willingness to listen without judgment provided Alex with a stability that helped him cope with the uncertainty at home. Word of George's natural counseling abilities reached his parents through his teachers, who were impressed by his emotional maturity. Princess Catherine recognized that her son was developing skills that would serve him well in his future role, but, more importantly, he was learning to use these abilities to genuinely help others. During the winter holidays, the royal family visited a local homeless shelter where Princess Catherine was patron. The visit was meant to highlight the shelter's work and bring attention to the challenges faced by homeless families during the cold months. While his parents spoke with the adults and older children, George naturally gravitated toward the younger children who were staying at the shelter. He found a group of children aged between 5 and 8 gathered around a small television in the shelter's common room. They were watching an animated movie, but George could see that some of them seemed restless and perhaps a bit overwhelmed by their surroundings. Instead of simply saying hello and moving on, George asked if he could join them. Within minutes, he had engaged the children in conversation about the movie, asking about their favorite characters and scenes. When one little girl mentioned that she missed her stuffed animal, which had been lost when her family had to leave their previous home quickly, George listened with complete attention. "What did your stuffed animal look like?" he asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her. The little girl, named Emma, described her beloved teddy bear in great detail. George listened to every word, asking follow-up questions about the bear's color, size, and the special things that made it unique. As Emma talked about her teddy bear, her eyes brightened and she became more animated. "You know what?" George said after Emma finished her description. "I have an idea. What if we drew a picture of your teddy bear together? That way, even though you can't hug the real one right now, you can still remember all the special things about him." The suggestion delighted Emma, and soon George was helping her create a detailed drawing of her lost teddy bear. Other children joined in, and, before long, George was facilitating an impromptu art session where each child drew pictures of things that made them happy or things they missed. The shelter staff watched in amazement as George transformed what could have been a difficult afternoon for the children into a positive, creative experience. His ability to identify what the children needed emotionally and respond accordingly showed a level of emotional intelligence that impressed everyone present. One of the shelter workers, Ms. Jennifer Martinez, later shared her observations with Princess Catherine. "Your son has a gift for reading people's emotional needs," she explained. He could see that Emma wasn't just sad about losing a toy, she was grieving for the stability and security that the teddy bear represented. By helping her honor that loss while creating something new and positive, he gave her a way to process her feelings. The impact of George's visit extended far beyond that afternoon. Emma kept the drawing of her teddy bear, and it became a source of comfort during the difficult weeks that followed as her family worked to find permanent housing. The other children also treasured their drawings, and the art session became a regular activity at the shelter, inspired by George's simple but effective intervention. As spring arrived, George's school announced a special project where students would partner with residents of a nearby senior living facility. The goal was to create intergenerational connections and help combat loneliness among elderly residents. While many of George's classmates were excited about the project, some were nervous about talking with elderly people they didn't know. George, however, approached the project with enthusiasm and natural confidence. He was paired with Mr. Robert Harrison, a 78-year-old former teacher who had been living at the facility for 2 years following a stroke that left him with limited mobility on his left side. When George first met Mr. Harrison, he immediately noticed that the elderly gentleman seemed frustrated about something. Rather than launching into cheerful conversation, George sat quietly for a moment and then gently asked, "Is everything okay? You seem like something might be bothering you." Mr. Harrison was surprised by the young boy's perceptiveness. He explained that he had been trying to write a letter to his grandson, but his limited mobility made writing difficult and slow. The frustration of not being able to communicate easily with his family was weighing heavily on him. "Would it help if I could write the letter while you tell me what you want to say?" George offered without hesitation. "I have pretty good handwriting, and I could make sure to get all your words just right." Mr. Harrison's eyes filled with tears at the generous offer. For the next hour, George carefully transcribed a heartfelt letter from the elderly man to his grandson, asking clarifying questions to make sure he captured every nuance of meaning. When they finished, Mr. Harrison had not only communicated with his family but had gained a young friend who truly understood his needs. Their partnership continued throughout the school year, with George visiting Mr. Harrison weekly. They developed a routine where George would help with correspondence, but they also spent time talking about Mr. Harrison's experiences as a teacher and George's thoughts about school and life. Mr. Harrison often remarked to the facility staff that his conversations with George were the highlight of his week. The young prince's genuine interest in his stories and experiences made him feel valued and remembered. In return, Mr. Harrison shared decades of wisdom about working with children, teaching, and finding meaning in everyday interactions. The friendship between George and Mr. Harrison became so strong that when the official school project ended, George asked his parents if he could continue visiting. Princess Catherine and Prince William were deeply moved by their son's commitment to the friendship and readily agreed to incorporate regular visits to the senior facility into their family schedule. During one particularly meaningful visit, Mr. Harrison shared with George his philosophy about connecting with people. The secret, the elderly teacher explained, is not to think about what you can get from other people, but to think about what you can give them. Everyone has something they need, maybe it's attention, maybe it's help with something practical, maybe it's just someone to listen to their stories. George absorbed this wisdom eagerly. Is that why you became a teacher? He asked. Because you wanted to give things to children? Exactly, Mr. Harrison replied with a smile. And you, young man, have that same gift. You see what people need, and you want to give it to them. That's a very special quality, and it's one that will serve you well throughout your life. These words resonated deeply with George, who was beginning to understand that his natural ability to connect with others was not just a pleasant personality trait, but a powerful tool for making positive changes in the world around him. As the school year progressed, he continued to seek out opportunities to use this gift, always guided by the example his mother had set and the wisdom he was gaining from mentors like Mr. Harrison. The young prince was learning that true leadership wasn't about commanding others or having the highest status in a room. It was about using your abilities and opportunities to lift others up, to make them feel seen and valued, and to create connections that enriched everyone involved. This understanding would continue to shape his character as he grew toward his future role, but, more importantly, it was shaping him into a person who would always prioritize the humanity and dignity of every person he encountered. The summer sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Sandringham as 12-year-old Prince George walked alongside his security detail toward the estate's community center. Today marked a special milestone in his young life, his first solo royal engagement, a responsibility he had specifically requested from his parents. The local youth center was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and George had asked to attend not as part of a family visit, but as his own representative of the royal family. Princess Catherine had spent weeks preparing her eldest son for this moment, not with formal protocol lessons, but with conversations about the importance of authentic connection. She had shared stories from her early days of royal duties, emphasizing how the most meaningful moments often came from unexpected interactions rather than planned speeches. Remember, she had told him the night before, your greatest strength isn't your title or your position. It's your ability to see people as individuals and make them feel valued for who they are. As George approached the community center, he could see groups of young people gathered outside, ranging from toddlers with their parents to teenagers who were clearly trying to look unimpressed by the royal visit. His natural instinct was to look beyond the formal greeting committee and notice the individuals who might need special attention. Near the entrance, he spotted a young girl who appeared to be about 8 years old, standing slightly apart from the other children. She was wearing a leg brace and seemed hesitant to join the group activities that were already underway. While the center's director began his prepared welcome speech, George's attention remained focused on the girl. "Thank you so much for the wonderful welcome," George responded to the director with genuine warmth, "but I'm really eager to meet everyone and learn about the amazing work you do here. Would it be alright if I spent some time talking with the children and families?" The director was delighted by George's enthusiasm for direct interaction rather than formal presentations. As the prince made his way into the center, he naturally gravitated toward the girl he had noticed earlier. She was now sitting on a bench, watching other children play a game of tag that required a lot of running. "Hi there," George said, settling onto the bench beside her. "I'm George. What's your name?" The girl looked up with surprise and a hint of shyness. "I'm Lucy," she replied softly. "Are you really a prince?" "I am," George confirmed with a smile, "but right now I'm just someone who's interested in getting to know you." "Are you enjoying the activities here today?" Lucy's expression grew a bit wistful as she glanced toward the other children. "I like watching," she said carefully, "but I can't really join in with most of the games because of my leg." George followed her gaze to the group of children running around, and he could see the longing in Lucy's eyes. Instead of offering sympathy or trying to minimize her feelings, he asked a more thoughtful question. "What kinds of things do you really enjoy doing? I bet you're good at lots of things that don't require running around." Lucy's face brightened as she began describing her love for puzzles, drawing, and reading. She was particularly passionate about astronomy and had been learning about the planets and constellations. As she talked about the night sky, George listened with genuine fascination, asking detailed questions about her favorite planets and what she hoped to see through a telescope. "You know what's really amazing? George said after listening to Lucy's enthusiasm for several minutes. "I've been to some incredible places, but I've never really learned to appreciate the night sky the way you have. You see things that most people probably miss completely." This conversation sparked an idea in George's mind. He excused himself briefly to speak with the center's director about organizing a special astronomy activity. Within 30 minutes, the center staff had gathered all the children for what George announced as a space exploration session led by Lucy. Lucy was initially overwhelmed by the suggestion that she lead an activity, but George's encouraging presence gave her the confidence to share her knowledge with the other children. She taught them about different constellations, explained how to identify planets in the night sky, and shared fascinating facts about space exploration. What started as one girl feeling left out of the day's activities transformed into Lucy becoming the center of attention for all the right reasons. The other children were genuinely impressed by her knowledge, and several asked if she could teach them more about astronomy in future sessions. The center's youth coordinator, Miss Patricia Wells, watched the transformation with amazement. Later, she would describe the incident as a perfect example of how George had inherited his mother's ability to identify not just what someone needed, but also what unique gifts they had to offer others. Prince George didn't just include Lucy in the activities, Ms. Wells observed. He recognized her expertise and found a way to let her shine while also enriching the experience for all the other children. That's a level of social intelligence that most adults never develop. As the afternoon progressed, George continued to demonstrate this remarkable ability to see beyond surface appearances and connect with people based on their individual interests and needs. He spent time with a group of teenage boys who were initially skeptical about talking with a member of the royal family, but who warmed up when George asked genuine questions about their interests in music and sports. One of the teenagers, Marcus, was an aspiring rapper who had been struggling with confidence about his musical abilities. When George learned about Marcus's passion for music, he didn't dismiss it or offer generic encouragement. Instead, he asked to hear some of Marcus's work and listened with serious attention as the young man shared his lyrics. "Your words really paint pictures," George observed after hearing one of Marcus's songs. "You're telling stories about real experiences that people can relate to. That's what the best music does, it helps people feel less alone in their experiences." Marcus was surprised by George's thoughtful response to his music. Most adults in his life either dismissed rap music entirely or offered shallow compliments without really listening to the content. George's genuine engagement with his artistic expression gave Marcus a new confidence in his abilities. The conversation led to George learning about the challenges that many young people in the area faced in accessing opportunities to develop their creative talents. The community center offered some programs, but funding limitations meant that equipment and professional instruction were often unavailable. What would make the biggest difference for young musicians like Marcus? George asked Ms. Wells during a quiet moment. The coordinator explained that access to quality recording equipment and opportunities to perform for supportive audiences were the two most significant barriers for aspiring young artists in the community. Many talented young people never had the chance to properly develop their skills because they lacked access to these resources. George listened carefully to this information, already formulating ideas about how he might help address these challenges. However, true to the wisdom his mother had taught him, he didn't make grand promises or commit to solutions he wasn't certain he could deliver. Instead, he focused on understanding the full scope of the situation. Throughout the remainder of his visit, George made an effort to speak with parents and community leaders about their perspectives on the challenges facing young people in the area. He learned about transportation difficulties that prevented some children from attending programs regularly, about families struggling to afford participation fees for activities, and about the need for more mentorship opportunities. One conversation that particularly impacted George was with Mrs. Diana Foster, a single mother of 3 who had been bringing her children to the community center for several years. She shared how the center had become a lifeline for her family during a period when she was working multiple jobs and worried about her children having safe, constructive places to spend their after-school hours. "The staff here don't just supervise the children," Mrs. Foster explained. "They really get to know each child as an individual and help them discover their own strengths. For my middle son, who struggled with confidence after his father left, this place helped him find his voice again." George was deeply moved by Mrs. Foster's story and by her gratitude for the center's impact on her family. He recognized that this community resource was providing much more than just activities for children. It was offering stability, mentorship, and hope to entire families facing difficult circumstances. As his visit drew to a close, George had gained a comprehensive understanding of both the center's successes and the ongoing challenges it faced. Rather than simply thanking everyone and leaving, he took time for individual goodbyes with many of the people he had met throughout the day. To Lucy, he said, "I hope you'll keep learning about astronomy and teaching other people about it. You have a real gift for helping others see the wonder in things they might not have noticed before." To Marcus, he offered, "Keep working on your music and telling your stories. The world needs artists who can help people understand experiences different from their own." To Mrs. Foster, he expressed sincere appreciation for sharing her family's story and for her dedication to ensuring her children had positive opportunities for growth and learning. The impact of George's visit extended far beyond the single afternoon he spent at the center. Word of his genuine engagement with community members and his thoughtful questions about local challenges spread throughout the area. People were impressed not just by his politeness or charm, but by his obvious sincerity in wanting to understand and help address real problems. In the weeks following the visit, several positive developments occurred that seemed directly connected to the attention George's visit had brought to the center. A local business owner who had heard about the need for music equipment donated a complete recording setup. A retired teacher volunteered to offer tutoring services for children struggling with academics. Most significantly, the local council approved additional funding for the center's programs after receiving numerous positive comments about the valuable work being done there. Princess Catherine was deeply proud when she learned about these outcomes, but she was even more moved by the reports she received about her son's behavior throughout the day. The center staff consistently described George's ability to make each person feel seen and valued, his genuine interest in learning about their challenges and successes, and his mature approach to understanding complex community issues. "He has truly inherited your greatest gift," Prince William told his wife as they discussed George's successful first solo engagement. "He understands that being royal isn't about being above others or different from them. It's about using whatever platform you have to lift others up and create positive change." The success of George's visit to the community center marked an important milestone in his development as a future leader. However, the real significance lay not in the formal protocols he had followed or the positive publicity generated, but in the authentic connections he had made and the lasting positive impact those connections had created. As autumn approached and George returned to his regular school routine, he carried with him a deeper understanding of his ability to make meaningful differences in people's lives. The experience had shown him that his natural empathy and genuine interest in others weren't just pleasant personality traits, they were powerful tools that could create real positive change when combined with thoughtful action and sustained commitment. The young prince was learning that true leadership meant being willing to step outside of comfortable, formal interactions and engage with the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of other people's lives. This lesson would continue to guide him as he grew toward his future responsibilities, but, more importantly, it was shaping him into someone who would always choose authentic human connection over superficial royal protocol. The ornate chandeliers of Buckingham Palace cast a warm glow over the assembled guests as 13-year-old Prince George prepared for what would become one of the most significant events of his young life. Tonight was the annual reception for Youth Achievement Awards, honoring young people from across the Commonwealth who had overcome significant challenges or made remarkable contributions to their communities. As George stood beside his parents, adjusting his formal attire one final time, he reflected on how much his understanding of his role had evolved over the past year. The young prince had specifically requested to take a leading role in tonight's event, not for the honor or recognition, but because he had developed a deep appreciation for the stories and struggles of remarkable young people. His experiences over the past months had taught him that his greatest contribution wasn't in ceremonial duties, but in his ability to truly hear and honor the experiences of others. As the first guests began arriving, George's attention was immediately drawn to a group of award recipients who seemed nervous about the formal setting. Among them was a 16-year-old girl named Amira, who had fled her war-torn homeland 2 years earlier and had since learned English, excelled in her studies, and started a support group for other refugee children in her new community. Amira stood slightly apart from the other young people, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace surroundings. While his parents greeted the adult organizers and dignitaries, George approached Amira with the natural warmth that had become his trademark. "These big rooms can feel pretty intimidating, can't they?" George said with a gentle smile. "I'm George, and I'm really honored to meet you. I've heard about the incredible work you've been doing with refugee children." Amira looked up with surprise, not just at being approached by a member of the royal family, but at the genuine understanding in his voice. "Thank you, Your Highness," she replied softly. "I am nervous about being in such a beautiful place. I keep worrying that I will do something wrong. You know what I've learned about these events?" George confided, sitting down in a nearby chair so they could speak at eye level. "The most important thing isn't following all the formal rules perfectly. It's about celebrating the amazing things you've accomplished and sharing your story with people who can learn from your courage." As they continued talking, George learned about Amira's journey from losing her home and family members in a conflict, to adapting to life in a completely new country, to eventually finding the strength to help other children facing similar challenges. He listened with complete attention as she described the support group she had created, which met weekly to help refugee children navigate school systems, deal with trauma, and maintain connections to their cultural heritage. "What made you decide to start helping other children when you were still dealing with so many challenges yourself?" George asked, genuinely curious about her motivation. Amira thought for a moment before responding. "When I first arrived, I felt very alone and confused. There were kind people who helped me, but no one who really understood what it felt like to lose everything and start over. I realized that I could be that understanding person for others who came after me." George was struck by the wisdom and selflessness in Amira's response. Here was someone who had faced unimaginable hardship, yet had chosen to use her experience to help others rather than simply focusing on her own recovery and success. "That takes incredible strength," George said with sincere admiration. "You've turned your most difficult experiences into a way to help others feel less alone. That's remarkable." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another award recipient, a 17-year-old boy named James who had started an urban farming project in his inner-city neighborhood after recognizing that many families in his area lacked access to fresh, affordable produce. George immediately included James in their conversation, asking about his agricultural innovations and the challenges he had faced in convincing skeptical community members to embrace his ideas. As more young award recipients joined their informal group, George found himself facilitating conversations between remarkable young people who might otherwise have been too shy or overwhelmed to connect with each other. He asked thoughtful questions that encouraged each person to share their unique story, and he made sure that quieter individuals had opportunities to speak while more outgoing personalities didn't dominate the conversation. One of the most powerful moments of the evening occurred when George noticed that one award recipient, a 15-year-old named David, seemed increasingly uncomfortable as the formal dinner progressed. David had been honored for his work creating accessible playground equipment for children with disabilities, a project inspired by his younger sister who used a wheelchair. During a quiet moment between courses, George discreetly approached David and asked if everything was all right. David hesitated before explaining that he was feeling overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere and worried that he didn't belong in such an elegant setting. "I keep thinking about my sister at home, and about all the kids in our neighborhood who will never see the inside of a place like this," David shared. "It feels weird to be celebrated when there are so many other people doing harder work with less recognition." George listened carefully to David's concerns, recognizing the genuine humility and social consciousness behind his discomfort. Rather than dismissing these feelings or offering simple reassurance, George validated David's perspective while helping him see the broader impact of his presence at the event. "Your feelings make sense," George said thoughtfully. "It does feel strange to be in such a fancy place when you know people who are struggling. But think about it this way: you're here representing your sister and all those kids in your neighborhood. Your story being celebrated here means that their needs and experiences are being recognized too." He continued, "And all these adults here tonight, who make decisions about funding and policies, they're learning about the real impact of accessible playgrounds because of your work. Sometimes being in rooms like this is how we make sure that people who usually don't have a voice get heard by people who have power to make changes." David's expression gradually shifted as he considered George's perspective. The idea that his presence at this event could be a form of advocacy for his community rather than a separation from it helped him feel more comfortable with the recognition he was receiving. "I hadn't thought about it that way," David admitted. "I guess if being here helps more kids get better playgrounds, then it's worth feeling a little uncomfortable." This conversation led to George introducing David to several of the adult guests who were involved in urban planning and accessibility advocacy. By the end of the evening, David had made connections that would eventually lead to expanded funding for accessible playground equipment in communities across the country. As the formal part of the evening concluded, George had initiated countless meaningful connections between the young award recipients and the adult guests who could support their ongoing work. However, his most significant contribution came during his brief speech to the assembled guests. Rather than delivering prepared remarks about the importance of youth achievement, George spoke from the heart about what he had learned from the remarkable young people he had met that evening. He talked about Amira's courage in using her painful experiences to help others, about James's innovation in addressing food insecurity, and about David's commitment to ensuring that all children could access play opportunities regardless of their physical abilities. "Tonight I've been reminded that true leadership isn't about age or titles or formal positions," George said, his voice carrying a maturity that impressed everyone present. "It's about seeing problems that need solving and having the courage to take action, even when you're facing your own challenges." Each of these young people has shown that leadership is about using whatever abilities and opportunities you have to make life better for others. He concluded his remarks by challenging the adults in the room to match the courage and commitment demonstrated by the young award recipients. "These remarkable young people are already changing the world. Our job is to support them and learn from their example." The response to George's speech was overwhelmingly positive, but, more importantly, it led to concrete outcomes that benefited the award recipients and their communities. Several business leaders approached the young people during the reception that followed, offering internships, funding, and mentorship opportunities. Government officials expressed interest in scaling up the innovative programs that had been recognized that evening. Princess Catherine watched her son with immense pride as he continued to facilitate connections between the young recipients and potential supporters long after the formal program had ended. She could see that George had internalized the lesson that his platform was most valuable when used to elevate others rather than to showcase himself. In the months that followed the Youth Achievement Awards reception, the positive impact of George's involvement became increasingly clear. Amira's refugee support program received funding to expand to 3 additional cities. James's urban farming project was adopted as a model by several other communities struggling with food access issues. David's accessible playground designs were implemented in dozens of schools and community centers. However, perhaps the most significant outcome was the ongoing relationships that George maintained with many of the young award recipients. He regularly checked in on their projects, celebrated their successes, and offered support during challenging periods. These relationships taught him invaluable lessons about resilience, innovation, and the power of grassroots community work. One particularly meaningful development occurred 6 months after the awards ceremony, when Amira invited George to visit her refugee support group. The visit provided George with an opportunity to meet some of the younger children that Amira had been helping, and to witness firsthand the impact of her work. During his time with the support group, George was struck by the strength and optimism of children who had faced unimaginable hardships. He listened to their stories, learned about their dreams for the future, and gained a deeper understanding of the ongoing challenges faced by refugee families in their new communities. "You know what amazes me about all of you?" George told the group during his visit. "You've been through experiences that would overwhelm most people, but you're still thinking about how to help each other and make your new communities better. That's the kind of leadership that changes the world." This visit reinforced George's growing understanding that his role wasn't to be a distant figurehead who occasionally appeared at formal events. Instead, he was learning to be an active participant in addressing real challenges faced by real people in his community and beyond. As George approached his 14th birthday, those closest to him could see that he had developed into someone whose natural empathy and genuine interest in others had been refined into powerful tools for positive change. His ability to see beyond surface appearances, to ask thoughtful questions, and to make meaningful connections with people from all backgrounds had become not just personality traits, but defining characteristics of his approach to leadership. The young prince had inherited his mother's remarkable gift for making people feel seen and valued, but he had also developed his own unique approach to using this ability in service of others. Through countless interactions with people facing various challenges, he had learned that true service meant being willing to step outside of comfortable, formal interactions and engage authentically with the complexity of other people's lives. Perhaps most importantly, George had learned that his greatest strength lay not in what he could do for others, but in his ability to help others recognize and develop their own strengths. Whether he was encouraging a shy child to share their knowledge about astronomy, supporting a young artist's confidence in their creative expression, or helping award recipients connect with resources to expand their community impact, George consistently focused on empowering others rather than positioning himself as a savior. As he looked toward his future role and responsibilities, George carried with him the understanding that effective leadership meant creating space for others to succeed, amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard, and using whatever platform he had to lift up the remarkable work being done by people throughout his community. This understanding would guide him through the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, ensuring that his inherited gift for connecting with others would continue to create positive change for generations to come.